The number you have dialed has been changed.
This talk is called Hybrid Hell. Hybrid Hell. And it's really good that we've got this as a hybrid meeting and that we've got Pip and Tim with us in a virtual way, as well as having all of you with us in the room. The way that we work has changed forever since COVID. It's never going to be the same again in terms of how we work together. The new norm is called hybrid, and we're not very good at it. We're not very good at this hybrid way of working, and we need to improve it. I'm going to talk about three things on this talk. I'm going to talk about why do we need to change, first of all. I'm going to talk about what's not working. So why do I think that hybrid is hell? And the best thing is I'm going to give you some survival tips so that you can survive hybrid hell. By the end of the talk, you'll have understood some of the challenges. Many will be familiar to you, but hopefully I've given you some new tips and habits that can take you maybe one step out of hybrid hell and maybe one step towards hybrid heaven. We're going to do the talk and then we'll have a chat. So I will do this now as I will do the conference next week, and then we can have a yarn. So if you've got questions, please leave them to the end, and we've got plenty of time for a bit of a chat after the session. So hybrid, this is how we used to work. Lots of people in a room, but now, of course, as we have today, we have some people who are remote. So when I use the word hybrid, I'm in a meeting just like this one. Some people are in the room and some people are dialing in. In terms of me giving this talk, first of all, I'm a trainer and I teach Scrum and Agile. I would love to have the depth and grandeur as Sandy has in the Agile community. You are very lucky to have Sandy. I love what I do, and I help people learn in any way around Scrum, Agile, and also about themselves. So I love what I do. I'm very fortunate. In terms of where I've worked, Sandy mentioned that I work for CommBank, and I've worked in lots of Agile teams. I've worked in traditional teams in lots of different roles. And now I've got my own company called Grow Your Agility. As part of those roles, especially that time at CommBank, I've been in lots of meetings. Now, maybe don't do this. I tried to think about how many meetings have I been in my corporate career. This is a scary thing. How many meetings have you been in? And I think I've been in more than 10,000 meetings. That's a lot of meetings, and it gives me some expertise as to what makes them good and what makes them bad. In the last 3 years through COVID, I've been fortunate enough to help thousands of people through my virtual training. So in the last 3 years, I've done lots and lots of fully virtual. I bring those two together, and now we can kind of take the best of hybrid and the best of what we used to do in person. I'd like to introduce you to Gopi. And this is a typical scene from a meeting. And here is Gopi. And Gopi is in India. I don't know whether you work with many colleagues in different geographies, but Gopi was not feeling safe. He wasn't feeling safe to be himself. And part of that was that when we were in meetings, he didn't want to show his face because he didn't feel included. He didn't feel he could speak up. He felt if he did speak up in a meeting, that maybe he would look silly, or that a fear of saying the wrong thing, especially as he was working for a vendor and I was working for a large bank. So I was the client and he was in a vendor team, and he just didn't feel safe for Gopi. I'm going to talk about Gopi's story and how by working in a hybrid way effectively between India and Sydney, we really created a huge difference to both how we worked, but also our relationship. In terms of meetings, we now have an audience participation moment. I want you to think for a moment, what percentage of meetings do you think are successful? And by success, it means they're productive and valuable. What percentage of meetings do you think are successful? Now, here's how we're going to do it. Let's put the cameras on Tim and Pip. Everyone show me 10 hands, 10 fingers. You haven't got 10 hands. Show me 10 fingers. Assuming you've got 10 fingers. If you haven't, that's okay. How successful do you think meetings are? Now you can go to one finger, which is 10%, 20%, up to 100%. What percentage of meetings are successful? Have a think. What percentage? Change from 100 to 0 or to 10 or to 50%. What percentage of meetings do you think are successful? Productive. I've got a 50. Tim's optimistic with 80%. What do you got in the room, Sandy? What sort of, how successful do people think meetings are? You're on mute, but I can't hear you, but that's all right.
The lowest is, I haven't done this hybrid thing before. The lowest is 20%, and we're going up a lot of 70%.
All right, a lot of optimism. You must have, okay, Ray, put your hands down. You must have very good meetings where you are. The person who had 20% was pretty spot on the money. 15% of meetings are successful. This is based on a Bain & Co. study in 2017. And this was not just about hybrid. This was about meetings in general. So 15% of meetings are successful. And you want to know why? Have a look at the faces and body language of the people in this meeting. Just take a moment. Maybe you could ponder which one you would be in a typical meeting. We need to do something about it. And one of the biggest challenges that we don't prepare properly. As much as that, though, we don't facilitate properly. The role of the facilitator is so important. And when we facilitate, we need to think about two things. We need to think about engagement. How do we engage people in our meetings? And how do we include people in the meetings? And these themes are going to go through my talk as we carry on through this afternoon. So I'll talk about why we need to engage and include people. I'll talk about what I've learned through the experiences that I've had, and I'll give you some survival tips at the end. So let's talk about why to start with. Why should we engage people at work? Employees are not very engaged at work. Right now, if we look at how engaged our workforce is here in Australia, only 23% of employees are engaged at work right now. This comes from the Gallup State of Global Workplace Survey. 23% of us are engaged at work. And if we look at some of the detail from Australia and New Zealand especially, we're on the global average of 23 and we're +6. Actually, we've got more engaged as we've come back to work and done a bit more hybrid, which is interesting. We certainly, when they last did the survey, were not in a good place in terms of engagement. These stats are fascinating. The happiest people are fully remote. And I don't know how often, Tim and Pip, you are fully remote, but the happiest people and most engaged people are fully remote. And interestingly, the lowest score is for the people who are fully on site. Maybe they don't get the flex. It's interesting, and hybrid's sitting something in the middle. When we now look at stress, how stressed are people at work? 44% of people globally say that they feel stressed at work, and Australia's just above, and New Zealand are just above that average on 47%. So lots of us are stressed at work. This is fascinating now when we look at how stressed are you and which way of working do you have. The people who work hybrid are the most stressed. So this way of working where we're hybrid and we've got some in and some out is stressful and it is difficult according to our stats. I want to now talk about how do we motivate people? How do we ensure people have fantastic meetings? If you're not familiar with this work, it's Dan Pink and Drive. And in Dan Pink's Drive, he talks about human motivation. He goes through three things, and I will take these into how we should do our meetings. In terms of motivation, the first thing that Dan talks about is purpose. A team that have purpose are motivated, and the same comes to a meeting. If your meeting has purpose, and a clear objective, people are more motivated to be there. The second part of Dan Pink's model is autonomy. And autonomy is really encouraging people to participate and be fully in the meeting and not just listening to one person talk. Encourage people to have that autonomy so they feel they have a voice and they feel that they can join. And the third one that Dan's got is mastery. And mastery is improving. So if we have a bad meeting on average meeting, let's talk about that and make it better next time. So using meeting feedback and retrospectives to keep getting better and better on meetings rather than just accepting that they're not very good. So that's the work of Dan Pink. I now want to go into this word inclusion. Inclusion. Have a look at the people on this picture. Look at the faces of this team compared to the previous one. And I agree with the Harvard Business Review study that talked about meetings and meetings being where culture forms. Meetings are a big part of work. Culture forms, grows and takes hold in our meetings. And we need to include people to get that culture going in the right direction. Interesting when we look at inclusion. again, a study tells us that women can feel less effective in meetings than they do in other situations. But it's not just women in terms of feeling that their voice can't be heard or getting into a conversation. Also, men with less forceful personalities and different socioeconomic groups as well. It's difficult for people sometimes to feel that they can be part of a meeting. So when we're creating our design of our meetings, we need to focus on this engagement and inclusion. So those two words I really want you to keep as we go through this message. It's easy in some ways to make an in-person session engaging. Here you can see we've got lots of color in the room. We've got people doing things in the room, but how are the people who are virtual going to join in? Again, with this one, it's a very visual room. We're having food, but the people who are virtual can't have food. Let's be inclusive. Maybe keep the food away from the camera, but we got to keep it and design it so that everyone can participate and everyone's equal. Let's now talk about some of the scenarios that I've seen and start to give you some tips in terms of how we can solve them. When we were in COVID, we were all remote. And the office scene that we've got today in Auckland wouldn't have been there. You all would have been at home. And actually, this is the best pattern for virtual working. In fact, for team working, one remote, all remote works best. So if one person isn't in the office, we all go remote. Now, you don't have to do this, but it created a real equal playing field through COVID. Wherever you were located, if you were in Christchurch or Auckland or Sydney, you felt included because you were equal. You were an equal rectangle on the screen. And if you do virtual well, it can be fantastic. But virtual is challenging. Take a look at this interesting survey. This was an early one through COVID. I love this survey in terms of the challenges of working virtually. But we don't just want to look at it from a humorous perspective. As many of you know, if you're just working remotely, it's not going to do good things to your brain. And you've got to do other things rather than sitting on Zoom meetings all day. So we love hybrid. We want to do a bit of time in the office and a bit of time virtually. All right, 3 scenarios. First scenario I'm going to talk about, you're running a meeting and it's hybrid and the people who are remote don't switch on their cameras. Let's talk about what we can do about it. First of all, I'll look at the lens of inclusion. How do we make people feel included? First tip I've got is about safety. Do people feel safe? Do people feel safe to speak without fear of ridicule? Do people feel safe that they can say something and that suggestion will be listened to? So think about psychological safety and how safe is it in your team for people to genuinely say what they think. Secondly, there are some good reasons to be off camera, and it's important that we acknowledge those reasons. Maybe someone's got a health reason, maybe they've got a technical reason, maybe there's a cultural reason, a cosmetic reason, or a political reason why they don't want to come on camera. So just be aware that you should allow people to give you a reason why they can't be on camera. One of the best things I've seen work is when we create what we call a team agreement or a social contract. We sit down as a team and we talk about how do we want to work together virtually. And this team agreement is something we can keep alive and keep ourselves honest to how we want to work together. So those are my 3 tips for inclusion. When it comes to, and here's Gopi. Gopi is in the middle there to introduce Gopi. And these techniques worked extremely well with the team in India, you can see on the screen. In terms of engagement, building one-on-one relationships is critical, especially if you've got a team of people who are remote that you don't see face-to-face that often. You've got to make time to build that rapport and build those relationships with those people. Just because they're virtual doesn't mean you can't have a virtual coffee or a yarn and just get to know them as humans. And with all the people on the screen, I made a big effort to do that, to learn about them, about their families, and it made a huge difference as to how they felt comfortable with cameras and being together. You need to learn some great techniques. There are some fantastic techniques to how to engage people. You can use hand signals. You can get people to show scores out of 10. For successive meetings, for example, you can use check-ins and get people to put their thumbs up. So there are techniques that we can use to create a place where people are more engaged and more want to participate. And also learn about different cultures and norms. From a cultural perspective, there are reasons why people might feel more subconscious or self-conscious on camera. learn about the cultures, but also learn about beyond just cameras, learn about their culture, so that you can understand more about them and they feel more included and engaged. So those are my first tips for a meeting where people are not switching on their cameras. I'm going to give you two more scenarios. The second scenario is where we have a hybrid meeting. We've got a room full of people, just like you have in Auckland, and you're dominating the meeting. The discussion is so focused on the room that Tim and Pip can't get a word in. So what are we going to do about this when the room are just dominating and almost forgetting that you exist when you're dialing in? The first tip, which is really important, and this picture is the camera that was coming from the room. The virtual people couldn't see people's heads. They were looking at the back of people's heads and their legs. You have to tell them. If your experience when you are remote, because you'll all have your days when you're remote, isn't working, you have to call it out. I was in a meeting last week. We had some executives presenting. We'd made a real effort to get it right. And 25 minutes into the 30 minutes, someone said, "We can't hear you, the mic's in the wrong place in the room." And we tested the room, but we'd shifted slightly. They couldn't hear the executives. You've got to make it safe for people. Not after 25 minutes, but after 2 minutes, it's not working, we can't hear you. Call it out. Call it out. We don't know that it's bad for the people who are remote. You have to tell us. If we're in the room and you're remote, you have to tell us. The next one I want you to think about is if you're in the room. For those of you in Auckland right now, think about Tim and Pip. Think about their experience. What can they see? Can they see your faces? Can they hear you? Think about their experiences and put yourself in their shoes when you consider the meeting. This one is huge. You've got to prepare and test the setup. The meeting I talked about from last week, I had 20 people in the room and 20 people virtual. This was the hybrid hell, 20 plus 20. And we prepared the setup, we tested the setup, we were in the room half an hour early, and we made a real effort to get it right, yet we still had that mistake with the microphone. So even when you prepare, it's important to learn from those mistakes and to make it better next time. Let's give you some tips for engagement when the room are dominating. I love to have a hybrid champion. So if you're using an MS Teams chat channel, or if you're using a WhatsApp chat channel, whatever chat, or a Slack channel, whatever chat channel you've got, you need to have a monitor, someone monitoring the chat. In the meeting I just mentioned, we actually had 2 monitors, 2 people in the room monitoring the chat. What can you see? Can you hear us? So after that first slip up, for the rest of that meeting, it was a 4-hour meeting, we really made an effort to have that communication and some banter as well to try and make sure that those people were engaged. So really important, someone's looking after the chat to make sure. And that shouldn't be the facilitator, because the facilitator can't facilitate in the room and try and do that. Often we say that the technology is the problem. I think the problem is that we don't take the time to learn the technology. All of this tech can work. Microsoft Teams can work, Zoom can work. Whatever platform you've got, WebEx can work. Take the time to learn it. It's too easy to just say, oh, it's the tech. And finally, and I know that you've got this sorted nicely, have common days in the office. So to avoid the dominant room and hybrid is to create days when we don't have hybrid. So common days, we all come in on certain days of the week, I think is a great habit that you've got over there. Last scenario. It's a big workshop, 20 people in the room, but 4 people can't come. So if you've got a real room-heavy meeting, what are we going to do if 4 people are virtual? Because you may have designed things for an in-person workshop. What are we going to do? So 3 tips for inclusion. Instead of having sticky notes in the room, and I can see you've got lots of them there in the room, this workshop, as you can see on the screen, I've taken an approach where rather than everyone in the room using sticky notes, we've all got our laptops. And if we're working on Microsoft Teams, as this was, or Miro or Mural, the people in the room are using the tool, the virtual tool, instead of sticky notes. You can have a bit of both. So you can have some people in the room with stickies, but really important that you bring these 2 things together. So you've got the virtual plus the in-person way of gathering ideas. Make it the same. Make it the same. Sometimes it's good to work in small groups, especially if you're in a big meeting. Rather than having lots of people talking all the time, break them into smaller groups and get the smaller groups to work together, and then they can come and share back. So try and keep it engaging, especially in a long workshop, by coming in and out of big group to small groups. And having one room as the main base is difficult. But if you've got 2 physical rooms and people virtual, now it's going to get even harder in terms of facilitation and coordination. So try not to make it even harder for yourself in terms of 2 physical locations. A few more tips. Sometimes these big workshops are better just to go all virtual. And I've learned through COVID that you can run some big planning workshops. For those of you who do things like quarterly planning and roadmap planning, it can be just as awesome virtual. So don't be afraid to say, let's call it virtual, and we're all going to dial in. We're all going to dial in and use the common tools. This one I really like as a concept. Imagine that for those of you in the room right now that you've all got your laptops. And if you've all got your laptops on, you've all got your cameras on. We've got one speaker and microphone in the room, and the people in the room have all got their cameras on. So rather than just seeing Chris as a distant kind of pin, I would be able to see Chris's face now close up and see his expression, whatever that might be. So try this. Try it with everybody in the room with their cameras on. You can use gallery view. You can put that on the big screen. Another way to try and connect. And the people who are virtual would then see all of your faces close up. Play with it. Try something and see if it works. Final tip for this one is to have 2 facilitators. So if you've got a room of people, the physical piece, have a facilitator in the room, and then have a facilitator to look after the people who are hybrid. And that worked especially well when you've got a lot of people who are virtual. Look after them. All right, those are the 3 scenarios. I'm going to give you a few more tips, and then we'll get you to share. Now, on your seats, and we'll get you this a copy of this, there are some 10 survival tips. And Sandy, I'll email you this, and you can make sure everyone's got a copy of it. I'm not going to go through all of these now. I will just select a couple of them that I want to call out. So a few to call out, I'll give you a couple more ideas, then I'll get your thoughts. So first of all, have what I call hybrid non-negotiables. So this is kind of an agreement. So it's a little bit stronger than a team agreement or a social contract. Let's agree non-negotiables as a team and stick to them. Hold each other account to looking after the people who are virtual as well as the people in the office. Number 2, you might want to take it beyond the team level and take it to an org level, an organizational level. Get the leadership buy-in and support for hybrid and doing it properly. So maybe we can create some rules and tools for the whole department or organization and make sure that's communicated and supported by the leaders. We all like to have a bit of a social. But if you were to go for lunch now and have a drink, Tim, Pip and I would be very unhappy because we couldn't come and have a drink with you. So try and do some team building where you would include us as virtual people. Don't just have the fun stuff without us, please. Because guess what? One day you'll be the one missing out when you're virtual. Finally, facilitation. I can't stress enough how much facilitation matters. The preparation for a hybrid meeting takes a long, long time. If you're running a big, important workshop, prepare. And when you prepare, I want you to think about having care and respect and how you can include the people who are remote. Because guess what? 2 days a week, you are that person. If you want to learn more about facilitation, I've got a fantastic 2-day course. Here's a few more ideas. I love this setup. This is at PM Partners in Sydney. This is a training room setup. And the way that PM Partners do this is that they have a bunch of people in the room and then they make a real effort, as you can see with the big screen, to bring the people who are virtual in. When they do breakout groups, the people in the room are getting up and doing stuff on boards. The people virtual are doing stuff together. So they're designing a way of training to run big workshops with trying to include people in both scenarios. But the facilitator, as you can see, has to take extra effort in terms of engaging with those people who are virtual and making sure everybody gets to be included. That could be a little bit high tech for some of you, as could this one be from Real Estate Australia, where Nigel's early prototype of kind of having a virtual person on a camera and maybe having them able to wheel around the office so you could always see their face. If that's a bit too high tech for you, you can just take a hat stand. And if you were having a daily scrum or a huddle, maybe you can put the iPad at eye height so that person feels included when you're standing up for your daily scrum. I've done this before, it works, and it's a great deal of fun. Those are my ideas. What we're going to do now is I'm going to pause and I'm going to ask you to take a moment and we'll have a bit of a chat now about what you're doing and what you're thinking can make a difference in terms of hybrid. So just start having a think, what's working or not working at your place. We'll have a yarn. We'll do that in a sec. To wrap up, I've talked about three things. Why should we include people and engage them? I've shared the three scenarios and what I've learned, and I've given you lots and lots of tips. Let's finish with Gopi. So Gopi, as I said, is based in Chennai in India, and he through the way we work together, through this hybrid working, Gopi felt safer because he was included, because we got to know him, because we designed our workshops in a hybrid way where he could participate. He started to let go of some of those fears. He started to speak up and he started to do some incredible things. And I learned that Gopi and his colleagues in India are so creative. They love gamification. And it was just amazing to see someone who was so reserved and so quiet, afraid to break out of their box or to try things, has come so far. And I really think hybrid way of working made a difference. This picture is of Gopi and myself and one of his colleagues and their kids when I was visiting India. And that's, you build these relationships, even though we're hybrid most of the time. Go and meet them, share a drink. It will cement your relationship. And when you're working in hybrid, make it even better. But it's not that easy to do this. And I want you to think that even for someone like me, who's an expert, the meeting I had last week had its challenges. Keep learning, keep trying something. If it doesn't work, try something else. Take a real agile approach to your way of working. All right, let's do questions. Thank you very much. Thank you.